A noun. One or two or more striving to reach or obtain something that only one can possess. B, one striving for a competitive advantage. In the history of sports, rivalries are a dime a dozen. Look, I'm from Brooklyn, where everyone wants to get ahead and knows they've got to squash the opponent. When I was the head coach of the Utah Jazz, believe me, I saw it all.
If you're going to do extraordinary things, you have to be emotional. You have to be emotional.
You can do it. Get a hand up, that's all.
I watched as bad call after bad call change the outcome of a game. I'd huddle my players together, urging them to try harder. Oh, I know the thrill of victory and the sting of defeat. When I was coach of the Jazz, our big rival was the Los Angeles Lakers. But here in Utah, there's one rivalry that really takes the cake. It's the annual football game between the Utah Utes and the BYU Cougars. Intensity fills the very core of the players, coaches, and fans on both sides of the field. Friendly banter is part of the community dialogue. And loyalties, they run deep.
Well, I fell in love with her before I knew it was good for me.
At the University of Utah.
True
and
blue.
he attended the MUS.
True blue at the U of U. There's plenty of us.
And our Betty cheer is that our children get to wear the winning team's colors the next year.
There's a lot of things in the community that really just ingrain this into people, whether they've lived here their whole lives or new to the area. It's red versus blue.
No matter what happens, I bleed red. It's my family.
Right versus wrong.
It's more than the school. It's more than the athletics. It's just being a BYU guy and bleeding blue.
The arrogant Cougar fans versus the horrible sinners up north.
But it's just that healthy, I love Utah. But it's healthy on the BYU side. But they bleed that, blue, contaminated blood. We have the red, good, rich blood.
I'm a blue blood all the way.
My blood could not be any more red than it is.
They used to always call us the devil's school, and they're the righteous school. You don't want to go to the devil's school, you go to the righteous school. So,
well, what else can you be but a devil if you're red?
Around here, when you meet someone for the first time, the quickest way to see where they stand on the most important issue in the state is to ask one very important question.
When you were referring to the university, you were referring to students who are outstanding just as they are at BYU. When those two schools meet in the athletic field, who do you root for?
I wear a brown suit.
He wears a brown suit.
You hear a lot of relationships around the country, rivalries between Alabama and Tennessee and other great rivalries, Florida and Florida State. But ours it goes deeper than that. It's not only on the athletic field, but very often it has religious undertones. I don't think it takes long for a student to come on the BYU campus to learn to have a certain kind of, I don't want to say hatred, but a negative feeling toward the guys up north. And it doesn't take very long for a Ute fan to start feeling the same way about the neighbors down south.
In the state of Utah, it can be the focal point of a lot of people's lives, 365 days a year. And when your neighbors and friends are maybe on the other side of that rivalry, that, fuels that fire on a year-round basis.
BYU, whether it be athletics or my education or my family life. The culture in Provo when I was growing up was BYU.
I want our team to win. I mean, deeply. It's like I've been punched in the gut if we lose. It is.
I think it's a very unique game, and in talking with the other coaches that have coached in it and then gone on to other places, most have acknowledged that it's the most unique rivalry and maybe the most fierce rivalry that there is in college football, and that's a pretty strong statement.
We Ute fans want the BYU Cougars to be at their best every football game so that we know that whoever wins or loses, we did it. They did not lose to us, we beat them. That it was a rivalry of all rivalries, and I think that holds true with every rivalry across the country.
I like it when Utah wins. I'll root for Utah if they're not playing BYU because I think it's good for Utah. And also, when it gets down to that last game when we're playing Utah, if they've been winning and we beat them, that's just gravy.
In 1847, Brigham Young came down Immigration Canyon and proclaimed, "This is the place." Unfortunately for Utah and BYU, he wasn't endorsing either team because neither team existed. So this is how it all began. The University of Deseret was created in February of 1850. It was later renamed the University of Utah. The campus had moved to 60 acres on part of the Fort Douglas Army Base. With all that extra space to run around in, it's no wonder the U started a new football team. Among one of its early stars was David O. McKay, who went on to become president of the LDS Church. As the pigskin was tossed around more and more, a big block U was installed on the foothill near campus in 1907. Down south in the town of Provo, a giant Y was painted on the side of a mountain by their students that same year. The Y stood for Brigham Young University, which had started out as Brigham Young Academy in 1865. The Y's football team began as early as 1896, but was phased out by 1903. The Cougar football team got its official start in 1922. The earliest showdown between the U and the Y occurred during an 1895 field day competition. After the track meet ended in a dispute over the score, the teams met on the baseball diamond. The baseball game ended in a brawl, and the rivalry was born.
In a true rivalry, both sides have to feel that they have a chance to win, and both sides have to kind of win every now and then. In the Utah-BYU situation, there was no rivalry in the beginning, which actually started in 1922, and Utah won that first game 49-0. Then it went 20 years before BYU won a game, and then they won it in 42.
The game was played here at Utah, and a coach by the name of Floyd Millett was kind of a fill-in coach at the Y, and he went up against Ike Armstrong's University of Utah football team, and it was totally an upset. I mean, it was devastating for the U, and a matter of fact, once the game was over, this story's been passed on to me by legendary Tribune sports editor John Mooney, was that Ike was standing up on the hill near what was the Einar Nielsen field house, and he's watching all this jubilation of the BYU fans down on the field after this great victory, and Ike just stood there, crossed his arms like this and says, "Turn on the sprinklers."
Then it went another 16 years before they won their second game. So there's 36 years they won 2 games. No rivalry.
When we had a football game on the same day as the opening day of deer season, we'd get 4,000 or 5,000 women out to a football game, but there were very few men and a few students. But we'd have maybe a crowd of 6,000 or 7,000 people.
Well, interestingly enough, in those days, the big games weren't BYU. They hadn't developed a really strong football program by then. The big game was playing Utah State on Thanksgiving Day. And that was so exciting to come to a U of U and Utah State football game and then go home to Thanksgiving dinner after it was over. So those are the games I remember most when I was really young, was Utah State.
And they used to play the game in Salt Lake because Utah had a bigger stadium on Thanksgiving Day. I remember as a little kid, my grandpa was a professor at the U, and they lived on University Street, and we'd go and eat and go to the game there, and then we'd go to their house and eat Thanksgiving dinner. And, it was a big deal to go to that football game on Thanksgiving.
Utah State, another traditional rival. And the Utes have a lot at stake, a bowl bid if they can win this one. The Sun Bowl, the Gator Bowl, the Liberty Bowl. The Utes still have that great defensive pride, and now it's 22 consecutive quarters that the defense has not given up a touchdown. After a 7-yard loss, Ron Edwards of the Aggies is back to throw. Captain Pokey Allen makes the interception to kill the Aggie drive.
It's interesting how, as you bring it up, the rivalries have changed, and that was the biggest football game in the state. Played it in snow and everything else, and the fields were not good, but it was that's something you put on your calendar to look for, football game and then Thanksgiving dinner.
That game with Utah State was as much a part of Thanksgiving for the state of Utah, from Box Elder County down to Washington County, as the turkey.
Well, BYU was kind of the doormat of the conference, Skyline Conference or whatever it was in those years.
And the BYU rivalry was not anything. That was just a little extra game that Utah would win every year. There was no big rivalry then.
The Cougars put on a big rush. Allen looks for Driggs again, and he finds him deep in the end zone. He hits him perfectly. Utah 47, BYU 13, a great win for the Utes, who earn a share of the conference title.
And it wasn't until BYU started to win that the rivalry really developed, and the rivalry with Utah State kind of fell off completely.
As BYU developed into a real football power, I think that's when it really became rather intense, because most of the time they weren't competition.
Then comes one of the most spectacular plays of the year. Little Ron Coleman goes into the center of the line and comes out on the other side, scampering 80 yards for a touchdown. He almost ran right out of the stadium. Utah 7, BYU nothing.
By this point in the rivalry, the Utes dominated, winning 34 games and tying 4 to the Cougars over a course of 42 years. BYU was no match for Utah. That is until Coach Tommy Hudspeth came on the scene.
Then in 1965, and I think in the 60s, we played BYU twice on Thanksgiving. Tommy Hudspeth came.
Tommy Hudspeth brought in this really good team, and they beat Utah and Salt Lake, and then they won. Hudspeth won a couple of other games. Hudspeth is the guy that kind of turned it around a little.
And Hudspeth brought with him the Marines.
There was a football team in the Marine Corps, and I think he recruited the whole team, or most of them.
Brought in the Marines, so to speak.
Yeah, that's still a famous.
That's one of the great stories
in the history of BYU.
What happened was a Marine recruit depot in San Diego. So a lot of the kids that were drafted and went in the military at that time wound up playing football at the base and had a lot of good players. Well, they were going to phase out the football, and a lot of those kids were just getting out, and there happened to be a fellow that was an LDS player, helping coach there. He contacted us and told us about these Marines that are all getting ready to get out of the military. And there for a couple of years, I think we had about 13 or 14 of those players off that team. The second year Tommy was there, first year that a lot of those guys were eligible, we won the conference championship, and the first and the only one that we had won.
Utah had won 7 straight, and BYU had a good team that year. Virgil Carter was the quarterback. I remember lying on the floor of our living room and listening to Paul James call that game. And he went on and on about how if we win this game, this is a big deal for BYU football program moving it ahead, beating Utah after 7 losses.
After winning 3 in a row against the Utes, Tommy Hudspeth moved on. He was replaced by what was then an unknown assistant coach who would later become a legend. This guy would lead the Cougars to a national championship in 1984. His cadre of quarterbacks would earn All-American honors. One would even claim a Heisman Trophy. For nearly 3 decades, his program would forever change the face of the Utah-BYU rivalry.
So during that early period up until Lavelle, we were 4-38-4 against Utah. Not much of a rivalry as far as, wins and losses go. And then when Lavelle came along, it just changed overnight.
When Lavelle took over at BYU and started throwing the football, all of a sudden it became pretty good. At that time, they were about the only team in the country that were throwing the ball, so they get good quarterbacks and good receivers, and all of a sudden they're going like, well, it's a lot more fun to watch BYU than it is Utah.
Well, obviously it was a very dramatic switch because Utah dominated for so long. I always tell people, well, Lavelle was up from Utah State. He was different.
Well, obviously he's a legend there. I mean, he put BYU on the map and built that program when he took over. They had not had a lot of success.
But Lavelle is the essential component to our program and remains that way. You're talking about a Hall of Fame head coach and also someone that's so widely respected in the game of college football. Not easy to do, maybe will never be replicated again.
I was at Granite for 8 years, I think, and then went down at BYU as an assistant for a guy named Hal Mitchell. And ironically, the only reason I got the job was I may have been the only Mormon in the world coaching the single wing. Because Hal Mitchell played at UCLA for Red Sanders and was going to bring the single wing back to football, and that's how I got the job. And they brought Tommy Hudspeth in, and Tommy kept me on the staff. And then Tommy left, and then a week later after Tommy left, they called me and to go up to the president's office, and they appointed me the head football coach. And he turned to the SID and he said, probably you ought to make a release to the paper, and that's about as much publicity as we got out of it, And then it was probably on the third page of the Herald. I don't know, but anyway, that's when I started thinking, I probably just going to be a matter of time before I get fired, because that's what's happened down here a lot. We started throwing the football, and that's how it all kind of got started there. Going pretty good.
Yeah, it was a long dry spell. It became a running gag. I mean, okay, we're playing Utah BYU, and us poor Ute fans, we would yell our hearts out and root like crazy and just get our butts kicked every year. And it became kind of embarrassing because Lavelle had created this incredible program.
To me, it became not if we would win. For us, it was how much are we going to win by, and how many touchdowns is, Wilson, Nilsson, McMahon, Young, Bosco, how many touchdowns are those guys going to throw? And there were times when late in the game, you were thinking, and you were ahead, but the other team was driving. It was like, just score and give us the ball back.
Utah's always been probably our biggest rival, and the 5 years I was at BYU, Utah beat us only one time. So, no, there's no love lost between the two teams when they meet.
They would kill us every year. We went from, 1978, where we barely won, to 1988, and would just get pounded. If Utah came close, it was a moral victory.
I mean, BYU bringing Mark Wilson in at the end of the game so that he could get his last 5 yards to set the NCAA record, that's understandable. That's cool. But the idea that he actually went ahead to score another touchdown to run up the score really broke Coach Wayne Howard's heart. It fueled the fire of this rivalry, and it ticked us players off. And regardless of what you call it and the reasoning behind it, it happened, and it's a fact. So Wayne Howard, at that moment in time, started to realize that this was more than just a sports rivalry. It had to do with something else. And I think as he understood it more clearly and went out in public after a win against BYU, and remember 1978, my junior year, we were behind BYU at the Ute Stadium. Randy Gomez, one of the great quarterbacks of all time, drops back, finds Frank Henry in the end zone to go ahead 23-22. We win the game.
And I mean, the place went nuts because Utah finally beat them at home. And it was one of the most incredible scenes. I can still see it now. Guys are just flying over the seats, and the stadium was just going crazy.
That was an awesome moment in sports history, and especially in the BYU-Utah rivalry, because the excitement level grew to that level of, oh my gosh, anything can happen when these two teams meet. The sad thing is that by the next season, fans from both sides started to elevate it to more of a holy war, And that's what really started breaking down the integrity of the game and really shattered the hopes and dreams of Coach Wayne Howard that he could make something of this rivalry that was going south.
The intensity of the rivalry was enough to drive Wayne Howard away. BYU would continue to dominate in the series for the next decade. Finally, a quarterback who could match the talent of the Cougars' string of All-Americans arrived at the U.
Scott Mitchell's team, and that was the Jim Fossil season, beat BYU. And up until that point, I think BYU had won 19 of 20 games. And so for BYU to come out and get beaten so badly, I thought, wow, that was pretty impressive. That was a big change.
And they're playing at Utah, and Scott Mitchell is the quarterback at Utah. And that day, he had an NFL career day, and Utah scored 57 points, and they beat BYU.
Dennis Smith, second score of the day.
And Utah tore down the goalpost, and they're selling pieces of the goalpost. But you could feel the electricity going through the stadium. Here I'm a BYU fan, and I kind of felt pretty good for Utah that year because they end this long rivalry, but the fact that they scored 57 points against BYU, but then it evened out the next year. BYU scored 70 points against Utah.
LaVelle's era, he created just a tremendous series of teams and players, and LaVelle was a remarkable coach. He just did an incredible job, and Utah was always trying to catch up with a series of coaches.
They never really established any stability. You know, after Ike Armstrong had served so long, you had Ray Nagel, Bill Meek, Tom Lavatt, Wayne Howard, Chuck Stobart, Jim Fossil. If you go back, those coaches actually served 3 to 4 to no more than 5 years. Tremendous turnover. Why? They couldn't beat the why.
Bill Meek actually won 3 out of 4 games against BYU, but that 4th one cost him his job.
Only a roll-up-your-sleeves kind of coach could inspire the Utes to pull out of their slump. He was Ron McBride.
But then Ron came in, and Ron had served under 2 or 3 of these coaches at the U. He served under Wayne, under Chuck, and under Jim Fossil. Whatever the relationship was with Mac the assistant and LaVelle the head coach, certainly became a very strong bond when they both became head coaches.
Yeah, Coach Mack and LaVelle, that was a great combination. I mean, it was like almost like the odd couple, you know, Oscar and Felix. And Mack is certainly the messy, a little bit of a loose cannon, and Coach LaVelle is the straight arrow and the stabilizing factor. But I think the two of them together, that was a great combination. And they're both just tremendous coaches first of all, and tremendous people. And those are some good days. That was entertaining. And I think it was good for the rivalry and good for the state of Utah football-wise.
The relationship, again, between Ron McBride, LaVelle Edwards, their perspective, their ambassadorship for both schools, and this idea that this is for the state. And there certainly are bragging rights, but they had a great way of keeping it in perspective. And I think a lot of the fans and the schools kind of fed off just their good-natured perspective of what the game really was.
To begin with, when Mac took over, Mac's objective was to win that game, to win that BYU Utah football game at the end of the year.
And I didn't realize the whole thing until we played the game down at your place, and then I got a real good feel for what it was. And after that, man, in my heart, man, I knew all I wanted to do was beat their butt because they called timeouts so the quarterback can break a record, and all their people on the radio talked about, how they kick Utah around like they're little dogs and all that stuff. And I never forgot that game. As long as I could live, all the games I remember that game more than any game. And that's the one where John Pease, mooned a guy or whatever. One where Wayne Howard said he hated BYU. It was an embarrassing day for Utah. And the BYU fans were having so much fun. As you walk out of the stadium, pat you on the back and tell you, "Oh, that's a nice try. You guys are really trying hard." It's kind of like your little grammar school kids, and they're in senior high school. So, from that point on, I knew that this was a real rivalry.
A lot of what Coach Edwards did at BYU was paralleled by Coach McBride at Utah. He really put Utah back on the map as a national presence.
I try to blot out the 34-31 games out of my mind, but they still pop up every now and then.
33 seconds left, tied with 31.
Lots of noise from the crowd. He's got the snap, pressure's on, fires, knocked down at the line of scrimmage by a BYU lineman. That makes it 4th and 10. And Utah's bringing out the kicker.
Was the first one the one you kicked the 90-yard field goal?
Yeah, that was Jurgensen's kick.
Lots of distance.
I'll tell you what.
He made it!
What a
he
kick.
made it! The University of Utah's Jurgensen has just kicked a 55-yard field goal with 25 seconds to play. Unbelievable.
Isn't that something? A guy who...
I had a feeling that day is when we got on the bus coming up to BYU that this team was ready to play, you know, because everything on the bus was completely quiet. Not a word was spoken. When they opened the bus doors, the team didn't walk off, it ran off the bus. And I knew that this team was ready to play, and it was good enough to win. The interesting thing about Jurgensen's kick, Derek Whitten was his long snapper. Whitten takes credit for the kick. He always does. He said, when he came off after the kid kicked it and we won the game, he said, "Hey, he's not the one that did it. I did it." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "And I snapped it before he had time to think about it."
34-31, the U goes to BYU, beats them on a last-second field goal by Jurgensen, win the game. The next year, come back, win the game 34-31, and then the third year was 34-17. Winning those games made Ron McBride a fan favorite and really got the rivalry going again. It revved up the Utah fan base and really got everyone's animosity towards each other going again.
It really signaled the end of an era where Utah had just been beaten 19 out of the last 21 times, and then they won 3 years in a row, and I think the third year they won 34-17. So BYU he said, we don't want to make it a 21 and give them that number again.
The fans are what make this whole thing go. Coaches coach the game, they put their product on the field, but fans, you gotta love them.
I know these guys will beat me up over here, but go Cougs.
I think fans are what make a rivalry. And of course in this one, it's basically the fans are a major part of it.
There's something to that in beating your rival. Just the sheer emotion of it that brings it out of fans.
Fans and supporters and boosters, the money's got to come from somewhere, and they pay the bills.
Childhood. It's the time to learn your ABCs and your 1, 2, 3s. And which team to support, if you know what's good for you.
My father brought me up here for a football game in honor of my 5th birthday. And unfortunately, that was in 1937. So I've only been attending U of U football games since 1937. We could get in for 10 cents. And the north end of the field was dirt up that slope. And so for 10 cents, you could sit in the dirt and look towards the length of the field, not from the side. But that's all Dad would give me was a dime, so I couldn't afford to sit in the seats, and the dirt was worth it.
But my biggest memories are that football stadium. Before the end zones were there, they had a thing called the knothole gang.
And to get into the football game, you had to go through the knothole, which was a hole in a sheet of plywood, and the hole was Cosmo's mouth. And as a kid, you would squeeze through that hole, and when you got on the other side, they would give you a big hunk candy bar. So 50 cents got you into the game in a big hunk candy bar.
and you could buy a season pass for $6. I think it was $1 a game, and you had a little punch card, and that would let you in the gate, and we'd sit in the bleachers in the end zone, and you know, it was a great time to be a kid.
They say Utahns are born into the rivalry. But imagine the dismay and heartbreak when a family member strays.
There's a lady that lives by me she's a Utah fan, and her kids are BYU fan, and her husband is a BYU fan. And that happens, I think, all over the place. There are a lot of people who have, some Utah fans in their family and some BYU fans.
We were very happy that he was a fine man that she was marrying, but we were shocked and a little bit dismayed that now we were going to have that University of Utah influence in our family, and we would have to be putting up with that. So I would have to say, as much as we love our sister and as much as we respect her, there is a little bit of feeling maybe in our family about why she had to take it outside.
I'm married to a diehard Cougar BYU fan and graduate down there, and so it probably took us 3 or 4 years to figure out how to just survive rivalry week, let alone enjoy it, because there were some fiercely contested games and emotions run high.
They wouldn't talk to each other. Families didn't talk to each other for a week. They'd just pass in the halls. They'd sit there maybe at one of the 3, breakfast, lunch, and dinner without conversing. It's all off. All bets are off. This is a football game.
The daughter-in-law particularly, a very, very staunch BYU fan, and it does make for interesting family dynamics at times. I will have to say that more than once my wife has kicked me under the dining room table on the family dinners before the Utah-BYU game.
It still is interesting to me, as I served for 3.5 years on the Crimson Club Board of Directors, that during that tenure, 2 of my daughters attended BYU. I got some hate mail. Clark, are you serious? How did you fail as a father? How could you allow one of your children to jump ship? What's going on here? And I took it with a grain of salt, even though I'm sure a couple of them were serious. What I realized in that setting is that when I go now to a BYU-Utah game and realize I have my children as BYU Cougars and I'm an avid Ute, that I remove myself from that religious rivalry and just accept the game for what it is, and I challenge every viewer to do exactly the same thing.
When we started going to the games, there's this lady named Bubbles. At the end of the third quarter, that little tiny bit of time, they would play the Blues Brothers, and she would stand up and do this, and we would all cheer, and everyone would clap and go, yay, and that's it, and then we start the fourth quarter. I'd love to meet her. That's Bubbles. I don't want to take anything away from her, because she's the legend. As soon as someone sees me, they start doing that crazy lady. And then I get up on the platform, and then I do actually. It's quite a traditional dance now. Didn't used to be, but it's the dance. But when they picked up, the Muss picked up on Crazy Lady, honest to goodness, it stuck, and I love it. I love it. Well, to know me is to know I'm out there. It's just a given. I'm a bouncy person. I'm an outgoing person. I'm really energy. I don't know. 60 years old and got energy galore. My grandkids look back and go, that's my grandma. But now my 4-year-old says, that's my grandma. She's crazy lady.
Sometime in the 80s, Utah football games became more than just the game on the field. They spilled out of the stadiums and into the parking lots for pre-game barbecues and other festivities. During the slow years, tailgating lured Ute fans back when, frankly, their team couldn't.
And we started out with about 100 fans, and actually had to to teach them how to tailgate. They didn't know what to do. I said, bring some food and some drink and, and just socialize and have a good time, come an hour or two before the game. And what started out as a small group, it started to expand and got bigger and bigger and bigger, to where the point was we had to have our own tailgate lot.
And that whole culture of tailgating, that never happened around here. And they got it going a little bit up here, and then down at our place, never. But now, game day is a big thing here at the U, and it's a very big event there at BYU as well. And I think that culture, that attitude has really made a lot of difference.
This is the palace. Many weeks of labor and years, but we've got it where we want it. Come on in and take a look. This is Utes all the way. We've been tailgating 10 years. We've been coming a lot longer than that. We are friends and family from it.
And now it's one of the best parties in town, and you have people with motorhomes and campers and trailers and fire engines and all manner of accessories and huge cookers and everything else. The Ute tailgate fans are the best. They really know how to party.
It's not that same way as far as the tailgating goes. And in fact, I think Utah probably has a much larger tailgating crowd. But there is a carnival atmosphere. They come early, they mill around, they have a little bit of fun. The band plays, they can buy some food. Game day is a pretty big day. 65,000 people that show up there at that stadium each home game. And their anticipation is that BYU is going to win, and so when they go to that game, that's what they're expecting.
Paul James was the sportscaster at the time.
Jacobs slants over tackle. He's in the clear. He skips and dances down the sideline, but he slips just short of the goal line.
Paul was first for University of Utah, and then he went to BYU.
Well, there's no doubt I had a unique position of having done the Utah games for 6 or 7 years.
From a broadcaster standpoint, what appealed to you the most?
Well, I think the records and the statistics, the fact that Utah's defensive team played 24 consecutive quarters without giving up a touchdown, I think that's exciting. They were third in the nation in defense against scoring in the final statistics. They were ranked by UPI and AP as one of the top football teams in the nation. They intercepted 23 passes, and just a chance to associate with a great bunch of fellows.
And then immediately switched over and doing the BYU games for 37 years. And the first 5 years I'm at BYU, they still think I'm a Utah fan. And I had more criticism from the BYU fans than I did from the Utah fans.
Paul James had changed his colors from red to blue. And for that, he would have to pay.
Because I was at Utah and then went to BYU, the Utah fans always thought I was a traitor.
His home every year on the night before the BYU-Utah game had some unusual thing occur to his house.
And my dog started barking like crazy, and I look out my bedroom window into the driveway and hear these people running in and out of my driveway. And I said, Annette, call the police. I don't know what's going on. There are 10 or 15 people running in and out of my driveway. And then I finally looked and I saw that they're decorating my house. Well, the first year they just did it with toilet paper. And the next year they put a junk car that had been beaten up with a sledgehammer that's all painted red with a cutout of Robbie Bosco behind the wheel, and it says, BYU sucks, Paul James sucks, everything like that. And then the next year they put a missile on my lawn. It's all decorated in red. And then the next year they filled my yard with toilets and toilet paper. And then the next year, there are tires, 50 tires on my lawn. And every year they had something new. It was really kind of fun and interesting. And for me, that was always a unique feature of the Utah-BYU game, because I know I'm going to get trashed.
Pranks have been part of the rivalry for decades. Even the university presidents, who ironically enough graduated from the other school, indulge in the fun. In fact, I've heard a rumor about President Samuelson's swimming pool.
And I have to confess to having played some part in this rumor that there is a University of Utah logo at the bottom of the swimming pool and a University of Utah flag outside of its Salt Lake house every day. Now, the former rumor, I have to confess, is probably fair to say not true because I don't think there's a swimming pool at the house. The other rumor is actually true because I'm paying somebody to do it every day, and so I'm losing money if he's not actually putting it out there every day.
Well, you're losing money twofold because it's actually the next door neighbor. But there is one out in front of my son's house. People have asked him how he could do that. He said President Hinckley didn't call me into his office.
The tradition of BYU was to ring the victory bell after every time the Y won a game. They put it on a cart so they could take it to the games, away games and home games. Well, we thought, what could be more fun than stealing the Y bell off the campus? I opened the door to the Y field house. It was sliding doors. And as it went up, there was my car outside with a couple of my Utah friends. So we moved that trailer with the Y bell, put it on the hitch, and away we went up Provo Canyon to Salt Lake. We passed the BYU wrestling team on the way down Provo Canyon as we were going up with the Y bell behind my car. The driver of the car with the wrestlers was the coach, and he had somebody take down the license number of my car. The security people from BYU came up to my home in Salt Lake, and the jig was up. Well, it was a prank in those days. I'm sure that's why we're not all sitting in jail right now. But even if you could get a hold of the Y bell, I mean, it wouldn't be termed a prank these days.
In our office building, we have a big Ute fan, and every year we try to do something to him or his office.
Well, you know, for years, I've had somebody or some group, and I don't know who it is, but they have continually harassed me during the BYU Rivalry week.
He's on the third floor of a downtown office building, and we had the window washers put a big Y emblem on the outside of his window.
But last year, it was just horrible. What they did is they had the window washer come down, rappel off the roof, and on the outside of my window put a giant block Y. Now, that in itself wasn't bad enough, but it was crooked.
So when he came in, he couldn't take the Y off from the inside, so it stayed up there for a week and before it came off.
So for one solid week, I had to sit with a block Y crooked, and actually the president of the bank got a call from President Monson wondering, A, who was putting graffiti on his building, and B, if I was going to be the next missionary that he was going to call.
Yeah, I think every good rivalry has a wager of some kind involved in it.
There might have been a dinner or two that I bought LaBelle during that period when they were hot. I always felt, though, that I had a terrible disadvantage because I'm sure they took my tithing money and paid his salary.
It's not the money involved. It's the fact that you have to go to the other person and hand over something and admit that you have lost that game.
I have a bet with one of the young men in my ward, and he's a BYU fan. In fact, he's Dave Chickett's nephew, and he has a BYU tie, and I always kid him about that. So last year, I said, okay, he said, let's make a bet. He said, if Utah wins, I have to wear the Utah tie to church, and if BYU wins, you have to wear the BYU tie to church.
The wager is for $1, but that dollar is, when you pull that dollar out of your wallet, it's about as heavy as a manhole cover.
After 3 memorable decades, it was time for LaVelle to retire.
LaVelle had a great run. I think it was 29 years, and you know, will go down as, you know, the icon of BYU football.
And it's LaVelle Edwards' last year as a BYU coach, and he's got a record of 5 wins and 6 losses, and he's going to go out on a losing record. And I felt so badly for him to think that here's this great coach who's going to end his career with a losing season.
We have a 1-point game, and LaVelle Edwards wondering how this 29 years is going to end.
After the so-called fumble.
Yeah, if the so-called fumble. I like the way you put it, so-called fumble. Hey, you know what? What was the running back's name?
You forgot.
Luke Staley,
It's
wasn't
Luke Staley. Luke Staley fumbles the ball. We recover, game over, right?
it? Well, it was close to a fumble.
Well, not quite. Hey, so
He was that far from the ground, so it was pretty close.
so fumble, game over, right? And the guy who's the umpire, that guy had hurt me in about 3 different games.
Oh, that same guy?
Same guy, yeah. The week before we played the game, I said, I do not want that guy officiating the game. I said, if it comes down to a crucial time, that guy's going to kill me. No. You know, and he did.
Fire short, it's caught, short yardage.
I can still see the fumble. I can still, huh? Yeah. Well, in my opinion, in my humble opinion.
No fumble. Bowman lets it go. And it is caught at midfield. Jonathan Pittman makes the catch, and the Cougars are still alive. 2 timeouts left. Bowman deep down the side again for Pittman, makes the catch, and he's in bounds. 70 yards on 2 completions to Pittman. Now they run Staley up the middle. He powers his way inside the 5, 34 seconds and counting. And Doman will run the option and cut it back. And reach for the end zone. He got it. Touchdown, Brandon Doman.
It was my last game. It was his last game. And for me, it was one of the most memorable games that I remember.
The McBride-Edwards era had leveled the playing field between the 2 programs. The new millennium ushered in changes with new coaches at the helm for both teams.
I really like Coach Mendenhall because his plan of success at BYU is faith, family, friends, education, and then football. And he lives that and teaches that. And through that direction that they go, they are still very good on the football field. Coach Meyer, well, first of all, he's an outstanding motivator, and he demanded a lot. He worked them very hard. I think the players didn't really like him, but they respected what came of that.
I thought we may never go to a bowl game again at one time of my being a Ute fan. And, you know, then with Coach Meyer and with Coach Whittingham, I think they both have taken us to the next level. I think Urban really knew how to work within the system, and was a great master of PR, and I think Coach Whittingham has just built upon that.
Our program has outgrown this game. The whole season rides on this game mentality, and I think that's how it should be. I don't think it's, you know, how can you say it's a successful year if you beat your rival but lose, 8 or 9 other ball games? And so I think that we've, like I said, moved past that. I think our fans have moved beyond that. And that's not to say the game is any less important to them in a lot of different ways, but it doesn't shape your whole season.
Both teams have had their share of dominating the conference. Their solid reputations and national rankings have elevated them to seek something beyond the Mountain West.
Okay. I am thrilled, Commissioner Scott, to have an opportunity to sign this on behalf of the University of Utah.
It's interesting, the focus is almost as much on that as the fact that we're moving out of the conference, what will happen to that rivalry. And I don't know that anybody can predetermine what's going to happen.
We especially enjoy our rivalry with BYU, and our intention is to have that rivalry continue with a tremendous passion.
I hope that the rivalry can continue on, but it's just something I'm not sure we can answer at this point. We'll just have to see.
But with the league transformation, there might be a year or two as things reshuffle, and there might be a break. And I'm not so sure it might not be healthy for a while to gain better perspective and then have a restart. How that's going to happen, I'm not certain.
Even if the fate of the rivalry is uncertain, one thing is for sure, the fans' passion will endure, and the band will play on.
I think it's the anthem that you have that rise and shout, the Cougars are out. And the idea that you are willing to stand for the glory that you're representing in being a BYU student.
Well, it's right next to the national anthem. I love that song, and I am a Utah man, and there's no doubt about it.
Who am I, sir? Utah man am I. The Utah man, sir, and will be till I die. Kai.
I have to put my hand over my heart when I hear the fight song going, and it gets me going, and it brings back a lot of great memories. Our fans know that song. They know every word to that song.
Rise and shout, the Cougars are out. They're on their way to fame and glory. And that conjures up the idea that you're getting your team together to go to battle.
It's my favorite thing to get up and say, I'm a Utah man, sir, and I will be till I die.
I have informed my wife and my friends that I would like to have the Cougar song sung at my funeral. So you know how I feel about that. After the funeral's over, after the closing prayer, then everybody stands and sings, Rise and Shout, the Cougars are out, okay?
When I say it's the #1 rivalry in all of college sport, we're not talking about numbers. I mean, when you talk about Michigan, 100,000 people there to see them beat Ohio State. We're not talking, and we don't have that kind of numbers. We don't have that numbers in the state of Utah. But we have a passion that is equal to anything or exceeds any of the others.
When you start analyzing red blood versus blue blood, the word that immediately comes to mind is family. That blood is thicker than water. That even in a marriage, if you get in an argument with your spouse and they start bringing your family into it, you immediately take sides. Don't you bring my mama into this. Don't you be bringing in my convict brother into this. Let's just talk. Don't you be talking bad about my family now. And that's the essence of a rivalry.
There are the great Florida State games and all these great Notre Dame rivalries and so on, but the BYU-Utah rivalry ranks right there with them for intensity and for interest.
The most intense one is this one right here. It really is. I mean, because the whole state is centered around this game.
Yeah.
I think it's important in the last analysis to remember that these athletic contests, as fun as they are, as spirited as they are, as important as they are only games. Last time I checked, not a single outcome has had anything to do with things like world peace or the national economy or any of those other kinds of things. And it is good entertainment. It does build spirit and support, but in the last analysis, it's only a game.
It's fun. It gives you a chance to really express loyalty and appreciation, and yet done in an honorable and respectful way. It's just a great thing.
BYU and Utah are so lucky to have a rivalry because there are schools out there that don't. San Diego State doesn't get this experience, and there are so many schools like Illinois doesn't get this experience.
I think the rivalry is excellent for the state. I think it makes you want to be better.
And because Utah is so good, you have to work your best to be able to defeat them. And if you win, you actually did something very good. I mean, this is a reward that you beat a very good football team. For BYU and Utah to have this game to look forward to every year, they're so lucky as players and fans to have that opportunity to get excited about this one game.
It's BYU versus Utah. There's a great chance it'll come down to the last play. Somebody's going to do something that seems very unlikely, and you better not leave because it's going to go right to the end.
Sports, we know, are the front porch of every university. Each fall, football welcomes back students and fans to a rich heritage of athletic traditions. So when we think of these two champion universities going forward, we'll have to always remember the past. No matter what happens in the years to come, the glory of this great rivalry and the memories it has created for so many, we know will never die.
So the rivalry is not just 1 week of the year. It's all year long. It's a way of life.
We don't even have to tell people our address. The house with the big U, and they know, if they're from Bountiful, they know exactly where we live.
There's no red at all. I have one golf shirt that is definitely maroon, and when I wear it, I get people giving me grief about it, and I make sure they understand this is not red, this is maroon.
My cute little granddaughter does not refer to the color red as red, it's Utah. So when we are coloring, she says, Grandma, give me Utah.
I avoid the color red. I won't eat anything that's red. I won't ride in a red car. I won't wear anything that's red. We really try to avoid anything that's red.
President Samuelson of BYU graduated from the University of Utah. And President Young, the president of Utah, graduated from BYU. That's how strange this rivalry is.
Red Blood, Blue Blood, the rivalry, was made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Dory Eccles Foundation, ZAG Incorporated, ARUP Laboratories, whose mission is to continually improve patient care and support the mission of the University of Utah, Comcast, the Robert D. Kent Jr. Charitable Trust, and the contributing members of KUED. Thank you.